All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Hi. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm just going to give everyone a minute to kind of get logged into the Zoom room here. We have people popping in, so just give us a minute to get organized. While I am waiting for folks to get settled in the Zoom room, I encourage you to log into today's program. There's a URL. If you're on your computer, you can type in the little short URL you see on the screen, or you can capture it on your phone, and that'll open our program for today. Once you get your program open, you're welcome to open up your chat box and drop us a note in the chat. We'd love to kind of meet you virtually. So if you just want to tell us your name and where you're from, if you're a teacher, you can tell us what you teach and where. We'd love to hear that. And great, yeah. Okay, let's do this thing. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zoe Burkholder. I am a professor of educational foundations at Montclair State University, where I'm also director of our Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Education project. I'm kind of the MC for tonight's event, which is a special program on Native American women's activism and resistance. So this is a program that I've put together with a number of my colleagues who you will meet in just a minute here at Montclair State University, as well as educators at the New York Historical Society. And our goal is to share updated scholarship, current research, and work in the field that a number of different scholars here at Montclair State University are doing, and to give you a chance to work with the New York Historical Society, which has just absolutely fantastic resources that you can use in the classroom. So we're going to be introducing you to those resources and giving you a chance to work with some of them here today. So this will be an interactive workshop, and you can plan to participate. All right, so we're just about to get started. And as a reminder, if you've just popped into the room, we have a program today, and you can access that program. It's a Google Doc on your computer or on your phone. So if you look at the slide that I'm sharing, I'm screen sharing, you should be able to see it. There's a URL code there. Well, where to go? As well as a QR code. So you should be able to capture that program. Any questions about that? Let me pull up the chat. Okay. If you have any questions during today's program, we have this set up as more of a classroom space than a webinar, which means we can see you if you have your video camera on, which we're delighted to see you, and we can hear you if you turn on your microphone. So if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand digitally, or I should be able to see you if you wave to me through your screen, or you can just turn on your mic and say, hey, I'm not able to access this. Can you help? So just if you need anything at any point during our program, you're welcome to just jump in and participate. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to do a quick overview of our program today. We have it divided into two parts. The first part, the first 30 minutes, is going to feature faculty from our NAIS program, that's Native American and Indigenous Studies. And the second part, for 1 hour, is going to be a hands-on teaching workshop run by the New York Historical Society. So I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement here at Montclair State University. And this is our new land acknowledgement, relatively new, developed in partnership with Indigenous tribes in the state of New Jersey. We respectfully acknowledge that Montclair State University occupies land in Lenape-Hoking, the traditional and expropriated territory of the Lenape. As a state institution, we recognize and support the sovereignty of New Jersey's 3 state-recognized tribes, the Ramapo Lenape, Nanticoke Lenni Lenape, and Powhatan Lenape nations. We recognize the sovereign nations of the Lenape diaspora elsewhere in North America, as well as other Indigenous individuals and communities now residing in New Jersey. By offering this land acknowledgement, we commit to addressing the historical legacies of Indigenous dispossession and dismantling practices of erasure that persist today. We recognize the resilience and persistence of contemporary Indigenous communities and their role in educating all of us about justice, equity, and the stewardship of the land throughout the generations. Okay, it's my pleasure. I'm going to do quick introductions of 4 of our faculty here at Montclair State University. These are the co-directors in our new Native American and Indigenous Studies program. You can find their full bios on today's program. So soon you'll be hearing from Dr. Lisa Brooks, Dr. Mark Clatterbuck, Dr. Maisa Taha, and Dr. Chris Matthews. I'm going to hand the microphone over now to my friend and colleague, Dr. Lisa Brooks. Thanks, Lisa.
Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Burkholder, and it's such an honor to be here with the New York Historical Society as well. And we're really excited today. We're going to speed through my part so that we have lots of time for this exciting stuff coming up. So Halito Chimatokma, my name is Lisa Lynn Brooks, and I am a citizen of the Choctaw Nation, and also get to work at Montclair State University with these amazing folks. And I'm one of the co-directors of the Native American and Indigenous Studies program, and this is a really exciting thing, and I'm really grateful to see our writing studies professor here as well, and just it's an honor to be here and talk with you guys today, because this is a very important topic. And I just want to open up by telling everyone that, we're going to kind of do our part today by narrowing the field. We're going to talk about a little bit quickly national movements, national actions of Native American women resistance, and then we're going to talk about regional and then local examples. And knowing that there's a lot of people in here that teach, hopefully that you can find some not just pertinent information, but ways to take things directly to your classroom, as soon as possible. So I'm going to skip ahead there. Okay, so this is a few of our goals. Our team works really hard on supporting state recognized tribes, and I'm not going to go into it right now, given our lack of time, but we do support and work towards, on a daily basis, efforts towards environmental justice, language revitalization, and cultural knowledge, documentation, and preservation, and then also trying to inform the public and increase the viewing and the acknowledgement of Native American contributions in public education spaces. So if we can go to the next slide. So I just threw a couple slides in here because I think it's really important for all of us to see a few things nationally. And this is something that's coming up, you might have heard of. The National Native American Boarding School and Healing Coalition is working really hard to get the word out and collecting oral histories that examine the trauma and the experiences and the survival of students that attended Native American boarding schools. And you might have heard of Carlisle Industrial School or Chilocco, and schools like these have had a dramatic impact in Native communities. And so there's a large movement, Native-based movement, that is trying to move the needle forward in reconciliation and getting an acknowledgement. And so this is really significant right now in Native spaces, because the U.S. Department of Interior is throwing their full weight behind this work, and it's done by Native youth and Native women, and it involves caring for elders, and it's just an exciting thing. And if you see anything on this on social media, stop and look at it. It's definitely worth your time. But there's even more. There's a few things that are even more relevant. On the next slide there. Okay, so I threw this in here because I think this is kind of overlooked. This is another really exciting example, really visual out there. If you're on Instagram, you might be able to find this. It's called Native Women Running. And there's a great, really short video. I don't know, Zoe, we didn't practice this part, but if we can, we might be able to make this work. There's a little video right there. So I'm not hearing any sound. So we can skip ahead then, if it's. Okay, so I think, is it possible, because Dr. Burkholder, that you're muted? No.
You guys deserve to be here in this space. Is that okay?
Yes. So Native American Women Running is it's an organization that promotes Native women in spaces where Native women are often not seen. So this is an organization that's national, that works on bringing women and the knowledge that they keep and the knowledge that they hold for tribals, for tribes, and pushes them into a forefront so that people can see them. And so it's active, healthy lifestyles, but it's also helping women contribute to their communities. And so they encourage Native women to run. They help sponsor women to run the Boston Marathon, the New York City Marathon, like all these things. And they also do really cool things. Like I'm wearing one of their shirts today in honor of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Relatives Week. That's where we are right now. So if you see people wearing red, hopefully this is what they're symbolizing. It's April 29th to May 5th. And it's another way of tying the community together. So Native people are urban, they're rural, they're on historical tribal lands, they're removed. There's a lot of different spaces and places that Native people take up and live and work in today. And so groups like Native Women Running, groups like, that help promote the action of MMIWR, week this week is kind of the heart of what we're talking about here. So if you see things like this, just know that this starts grassroots. The majority of these things are Native women who are working with other women, in their areas, and then connecting out into these wider and wider circles until, change happens. And it's really beautiful. And these things are evidenced everywhere, but sometimes overlooked. So I just wanted to call your attention there. We're going to have a couple of more examples today that I want you to really focus on. Mark's going to be talking about the power of Native women, and specifically Winona LaDuke and her work against the Line 3 pipeline. We also have Dr. Taha talking about the community work, the really intensive, beautiful work that Nicole language and create spaces of healing in Lenape communities throughout the United States, regionally, but also right here in New Jersey. And then finally, Dr. Matthews is going to speak about the legacy of Vivian Milligan and her fight for environmental justice at the home sites in the Ramapo ancestral lands. So I'm really excited, and we're going to turn this over just for time. We're going to start with Dr. Clutterbuck, and I have the official timer. They trust me with it, so I think we're ready.
All right. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Yeah, as Lisa said, my name is Mark, and I'm a professor of religion and Native American studies here at Montclair State. And I do a good bit of grassroots environmental activism with communities in my home state of Pennsylvania, fighting the frack gas industry. But I also work with Indigenous communities across the US, resisting extractive industries and especially fossil fuel projects being forced through ancestral tribal lands. And for me, it's both what I do in terms of my own passion and activism. It's also a big part of what I study and research as well. And I'll talk about some of that today. But one Indigenous community that I've worked with recently, a good bit, is the Anishinaabe in what is today known as northern Minnesota. And for the past 10 years, the Anishinaabe have led a huge grassroots fight to stop Line 3. And Line 3, as you may have heard, it's a dirty tar sand oil pipeline being forced through Anishinaabe treaty lands from Canada by a company called Enbridge. And by the way, Enbridge happens to, you may or may not know this, operate gas pipelines that go through New Jersey, including violations of ancestral lands and burial sites of the Ramapo tribe in Mahwah, just 30 minutes from Montclair's campus. I was just thinking about this last week. Chris, who you'll hear shortly, Chris Matthews and I took some of our students to Mahwah to meet with Ramapo tribal elders. Yeah, it was just a few days ago, while they worked to identify and honor their ancestors whose graves have been desecrated by that pipeline. So for those who say that activist field trips can't happen, that's not true. So to be creative. But in the few minutes I have with you, I do want to share just one example of how the Anishinaabe women have led a powerful, really a 7-year resistance movement to fight this Line 3 from Enbridge. And one of the key leaders of the Stop Line 3 movement is Winona LaDuke. And for those who might not know, Winona is an Anishinaabe elder from the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota. She's the founder of the Earth, along with the Indigo Girls many years ago. She's an economist, she's an author, she's an industrial hemp grower and producer, and she's basically an international rock star in fighting for Indigenous and environmental rights. And I've had the privilege to work alongside her a little bit in recent years, partly through just my time in northern Minnesota, spending some time at Stop Line 3 actions and encampments, and also more specifically through a book project that I'm working on right now, a book that's called Sacred Resistance. It's due to come out early next year through Orbis Books. But basically, the book, it looks at five spiritually grounded eco-activist movements in the United States, a number of them Indigenous led. And one of those movements is the Anishinaabe-led Stop Line 3 movement that Winona has been so much a part of. And she has actually co-authored that chapter for the book. And she's also writing the foreword to the book right now. But while the Line 3 pipeline was being forced through treaty land, Winona led a number of direct actions to block or delay and call attention to the treaty and the environmental violations that were taking place by Enbridge. And one action that she led was a jingle dress dance blockade, and basically it was an action where Indigenous women elders gathered for a traditional jingle dress dance ceremony, prayer, celebration of Anishinaabe culture, demonstrating ways of respecting the earth. But beautifully, this ceremony was doubling as a blockade of construction of the pipeline. And I wanted to show just like a 25-second clip of that action. I don't know if that link is live or not on the slide. It starts at about 25 seconds. You can scoot it up from about 25 seconds to a minute. That's what I want to look at.
Mark, let me know if you can hear the sound when I hit play, will you?
Okay, I did before.
Keep their prayers up.
Yeah, that's it.
But they intend to drill here, and the 22 drills, this is one. These dresses are for healing. These dresses are for praying, so we ask the woman to come and pray for our water. Listen to them sounds, listen to them sounds. Shishikun, shishikun. That's what that sound is, the sound of water hitting water. So we're here today to pray for the water, and you can be sure that the spirits are watching us. You know, our spirits are watching us, so do your best, and then do a little better.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Zoe. So, Indigenous women are the undisputed leaders of frontlines eco-activist work being done around the world today. Like, that's just a fact. But what I want to leave you with today is not simply the fact that Indigenous women are leading this work around the world, but I really want us to consider the way in which Indigenous women are leading the fight to protect the earth. Like this jingle dress dance, it's not simply a savvy tactic, right, for delaying pipeline construction, which it is that, right? But it's more than that. Like the dance itself represents an intentional call to reimagine how we're living on this planet, right? Like to literally step on this earth in a sacred way, in a respectful, intentional way, to dance together as communities, right? Not as individuals, to confront industrial violence with peaceful, joyful, prayerful, communal, direct action, right? To be bold and to be confident in that work, and to understand that's the moral high ground. And dancing and praying directly in the path of a new oil pipeline, right? It's not simply a call to stop building new climate-killing fossil fuel projects, right? It is that. But it's a call to start developing a fundamentally different relationship to the earth and to one another, right, in the process. And 5 minutes goes fast. I'm probably there. Is that true? Is that it already?
Yeah, I know. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I could listen to that
Yeah.
all day. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So can
Thank
I say one thing for 30 seconds?
Mm.
So I put in one more slide. There's a lot of pessimism around environmental activism, right? Because things seem to be getting worse. But change happens, right? It happens slowly, it happens incrementally. And maybe you can come back later and see the slide, but it's a slide of a ruling that a federal judge. So Winona was arrested that day, along with a number of Indigenous women, mid-ceremony, right, by state police, and they faced trial. Ultimately, a federal judge dismissed the charges. and dismissed the charges by actually making a pretty unusual statement and saying, as a federal judge, that basically for 400 years, the courts have gotten it wrong. The courts have exploited and abused Indigenous people and their land all along, and that it would actually be immoral and unjust to charge these women. And she dismissed the charges, saying that the criminal act would be charging them for conducting ceremony and praying on their own sacred land. So I would just challenge all of us to find ways of bringing Indigenous activist voices into our classrooms, right? Through videos, through podcasts, through articles, so our students can hear these voices, see the actions, and hopefully be transformed in their thinking the same way that federal judge was. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark, so much. All right, Dr. Taha. I'm setting that timer. We only have 10 minutes, kids.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon and for giving us some of your time. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Maisa Taha. I teach in the anthropology department at Montclair State, and my area of specialty is linguistic anthropology, which means that I'm really interested in the connecting pieces between language and culture. It's been an honor and an ongoing adventure and a learning process for me to work alongside Nicole Pecor, who is an enrolled member of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of the Mohican Nation. Nicole is a language teacher and a community healing advocate. And what I'm going to share with you today flows so nicely from what Mark just shared with us in terms of reimagining how people relate to one another, how people relate to the earth, and so on. This is very much in line with the work that Nicole is doing. And so, to give you a bit of background here, Nicole came to New Jersey and spent a year in residency at the Munsee Three Sisters Farm in Newton, New Jersey, which is run by the Ramapo Lenape Turtle Clan chief, Vincent Mann. And he was interested and remains interested in reconnecting his community with language and culture. And so he invited Nicole out to sort of be that person. In my conversations with her, I have been sort of struck dumb by many things that she says. More often than I like to admit, she has a huge vision, and she works at a radical level. And I mean radical in the literal sense of that word, which means that she's really focused on addressing the root causes of community trauma through healing interventions. And she's interested in reconnecting her community and the communities here in New Jersey and elsewhere, reconnecting people, places, and the knowledge that helps keep them whole emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And to hear her talk about it, my hope is that in a future workshop, she will be here describing her work in person. But for now, I can tell you how it's affected me and some of my conversations I've had with her. We've been working with Nicole now for the last 2 years as we work to position the university and position ourselves to support efforts at Munsee language revitalization here in the state of New Jersey. And during one of our earliest conversations, Nicole explained to me, she said, there are 4 gifts that every human being is born with: love, peace, free will, and language. And so my mind was blown. I'm an academic, and language in my life could be any number of things. It could be described as a marketable skill, a doorway to opportunity, right? Even an enjoyable way to connect with new people. But I have never heard it described as an innate human gift. So this gives you some sense of the way that Nicole approaches the work that she does. She approaches it holistically, and she approaches it with a sense of spiritual import and spiritual healing and impact. As I mentioned, so she's a member of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band, which is located in today's Wisconsin. They are a group of about a tribe of about 1,500 people, descendants of Munsee and Mohican-speaking communities who were forcibly displaced from the East. And what this means is that they're relatives to Indigenous communities that live all across North America today. So when you maybe hear Native and Indigenous people say that they have relatives all across Turtle Island, they mean this literally, they mean it spiritually, and they mean it genealogically. So among the problems or issues that Nicole is focusing on today, you know, I preface this by saying that I work with language, she works with the language, but these things are connected to wider issues of identity and existence, right? So one of the contextual pieces here is that Nicole's ancestors underwent repeated forced migrations from the East Coast, and along the way ended up at points as far away as Ontario and Oklahoma and many others. And we're not talking about something that happened that long ago. It's in living memory of many of their elders that they remember the latest displacement, right, when they were young. So the latest displacement having taken place about 70 years ago. In addition, in living memory, people have experienced forced separation of families and children because of the requirement to attend boarding schools, give up their languages, profess Christianity. All of this has left a number of lasting effects on communities and within families. So Nicole tends to describe this as a loss of identity, and she worries that especially the young people in her community don't fully know who they are. And the way she's seeing that is that this manifests in anger, fear, depression, and other issues. So in terms of responding, right, Nicole works both within her tribe and beyond it. She's the granddaughter of a past Stockbridge Munsee tribal president, and she is the executive director of Nova Nations, which is a nonprofit that she co-founded recently with like-minded family and friends. Ultimately, her hope is to establish an entirely sustainable community organized around language, food, sovereignty, dance, art, history, and learning. And among the many moving things that she's written, in terms of her motivation for this work, she writes that education itself is a trauma for Indigenous people that is felt deep in the roots of our DNA. And she goes on to say, if two worlds could not be more polar opposite from each other in conflict with one another, it would be the two worlds that exist in every Indigenous person, whether consciously or unconsciously. So as we talk about activism, as we talk about, you know, we heard Mark talk about direct action. I'm not sure Nicole would call what she does activism, and she works in a different way. I think one of the benefits of having this conversation today is that we get a sense of how Indigenous women are working in these various ways to make concrete changes. So what Nicole has been doing is focusing on creating spaces where healing can happen. I've been lucky enough to witness some of her Munsee language classes, and in those spaces, she focuses as much, if not more, on making participants feel safe and heard, as she does on, say, introducing vocabulary or having people practice expressions. She has a quiet way of working that unfolds through individual and small group conversations and in talking circles that she has brought dozens and dozens of people into. She shares this vision of Indigenous life that's grounded in the teachings that she's been given throughout her life, while also giving space for other people to discover how they connect to those teachings. So to my mind, she really reframes what we often experience in educational spaces as a grasping for answers or grasping for certainty by reminding people that listening and their own learning is unfolding as a process, right?
Thank you so much, Dr. Taha. I'm sorry to have to cut you off
That's
there.
okay. That's all right. There's so many wonderful things to say. So I didn't get to describe the work exactly that we're doing, but on the next slide, when you all get access to these, there is a QR code that will take you to a digital repository that we're building in cooperation with Nicole to make Muncie learning materials available to community members here. And if any of you would find this fun to bring into your classrooms, please don't hesitate to make use of it or to reach out to us for more details about it. Thank you.
Well said. We can, if you guys want us to talk much longer, call us. We'll meet and go on and on. But right now we have 5 minutes remaining. I'm told we're given 5 extra minutes. It's a real gift. So, Dr. Matthews, it's on you.
Okay, I'll be as quick as I can because it would be nice to have a brief conversation. So I'm going to share with you some information about a woman who's a member of the Ramapo Lenape Turtle Clan, who Misa mentioned before. And this woman's name is Vivian Milligan, as you can see. She passed away just a couple of years ago. The way all of us came to know her was because we built a relationship between our program at Montclair State and the Ramapo Turtle Clan, and without fail, everyone we talked to said Vivian was the one you should have met. And so, I mean, we knew that going in as we started our work, but I followed up with some of our colleagues and basically came away with a simple statement. To give voice to someone who represents Vivian, I think, accurately. And it's essentially, as you've heard today, and as you all mostly know, the story of Native American history, Native American contemporary existence, and even futures is filled with trauma. But with trauma, we need the voices of resilience, right? Beyond resistance, beyond fighting back, we need to see how people survive. And women often and unsurprisingly care about everyone. That's a quote. And because, as Ramapo elder Wayne Mann told us, women rule, the rest of us follow. And he was specifically talking in that voice about Vivian. Can you move to the next slide, please? Just some other pictures of Vivian. The story that we know about Vivian was that she lived in Upper Ringwood, New Jersey as a member of the Turtle Clan her entire life. She was born there, lived there as a child, as a young adult, had her own family, became a grandparent, and was relatively quiet and unassuming, as most people have reported. But something happened to Upper Ringwood, which some of you may know, which was that during the 1960s and early 70s, the Ford Motor Company used their homeland around Ringwood to dump thousands of tons of toxic waste. Much of it was identified as something called paint sludge, which is the paint that washes off of cars when they're being made. This paint sludge came from Ford's, at the time, largest automobile factory in the world in Mahwah, just on the other side of the mountain from Ringwood. And it seems to us that the Ringwood community, or the Turtle Clan in Ringwood, were seen as vulnerable and exploitable, and people that wouldn't be able to fight back against this, what was then quasi-legal and what would be today very illegal dumping of toxic waste. The problem with this, as you can imagine, the waste is not something that people necessarily recognize as dangerous until usually it's too late. What we know about the Turtle Clan today in Upper Ringwood is that they face cancer rates that are sky high, and the disease itself has come in more than a dozen variations, and some of which are incredibly rare. They face problems with lead poisoning, respiratory sickness, blood disorders, skin lesions, and it affects children just as often as adults. It is trauma defined at its most unadulterated form. And the issue was this, and this is what brought Vivian from being a quiet, unassuming mother and grandmother, was that she realized that it was her responsibility to take care of those people by stepping up and stepping out. And she became the voice of the community in their fight, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, after Ringwood was delisted as a Superfund site. And then they knew it was not safe to live there. They knew from their own knowledge of family members and neighbors suffering with disease and passing away much too early that the site still wasn't clean. And so through Vivian's efforts to lead her community, to demand satisfaction, to go to Washington and speak to Congress about this, that they were able to get the Ringwood Superfund site relisted as a Superfund site. And that is the only Superfund site in the history of the program, which started in the 1980s, to ever be relisted. And so she was able to successfully call out the EPA, in other words, our federal government, as failing her community overtly. And it was this leadership role that she played that put her in a position to become a voice of activism, of resistance, and of resilience. Today, just as a little bit of a caveat, we no longer have Vivian, but we are in the process of creating the Vivian Milligan collection or archive, where we are taking documents that she helped her community and nonprofits supporting her community collect, so that they could continue to document the suffering of the community, but also to support ongoing legal action. Currently, the EPA is planning to delist the Ringwood site again, but this is after an agreed upon plan, not agreed upon by the community, but agreed upon by government agencies, to cap the waste, the tons of waste, to make it supposedly safe. And the community does not agree that it is safe. And it is one of the other sides of what we're doing. We're creating this archive in her name, so that the legacy of her activism can be the information that we use to continue to support that community's fight against what is essentially failure of our own government. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matthews. I really appreciate it. And, there's a wow, right at 5 minutes. It's impressive. We encourage and invite you all to have ongoing conversations about modern Native activism, especially as we see the stunning examples of Native American women. And again, we'd be happy to have communication with you and have that kind of dialogue with you. It's important to know that you have a place in this type of work, and that there's always room to grow, especially in New Jersey. We have issues of sovereignty, we have issues of recognition, we have problems related to mascots. We have a lot of stuff to do here and a lot of work. And all of these amazing women have been examples for us. And we have been able to take the work that we do out in the community in different places and apply that directly into our own classrooms. We're all instructors. We all teach and apply these things in our spaces where we just live and breathe it every day. And I think that's the beauty of it and the ongoing nature of what they do and what they teach us. So I think we might have just a second for some Q&A, Dr. Burkholder.
Yeah, I cannot live without Q&A. So folks who are here with us, if you'd like to raise your hand digitally, that'll create a line for us. Or if you'd like to type your question in the chat box, that'll work too. I'm not sure we'll get to it. We're going to start with people who want to turn on their cameras and their mics and talk to us. So if anyone would like to ask a question to any of the professors who have presented so far, now's your chance.
If you don't ask a question, they're going to start over and do the whole presentations again.
Yeah, these professors going to talk.
They're going to talk.
I
Feel like I can kick some of it off. Dr. Clatterbuck, is there anything you wanted to add that possibly you didn't get a chance to? Anything that wasn't said that needed to be added?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can always talk more. But yeah, one of the things I was actually thinking about a lot while I was just kind of going back through and thinking about Winona's work is that part of the genius of Winona, but also, I mean, a lot of Indigenous women activists that I'm familiar with in a lot of different fields, is that I feel like they understand more clearly than most that like the political and economic and social and legal and military structures that permit so much of the exploitation of Indigenous land. You mentioned MMIW, right? Murdered and missing Indigenous women and children and Two-Spirit people. Right? Those are like, they're the same structures, right? That are doing the environmental damage, that are targeting women, that are targeting children, that are targeting Indigenous land. And even, one of the largest drivers of the assault on Indigenous women and children and Two-Spirit people actually arises from what's called man camps that are set up in the building of pipelines near and through Indigenous lands, where these workers come from all over the country and are thrown together, and then end up targeting Indigenous women on reservation communities. So I think, one of the most important lessons that like we can teach our students in doing whatever classes we teach, whatever fields, is this the issue of intersectionality, right? The intersectionality of social justice campaigns. Winona is constantly preaching that like the same violently, let's just name it, patriarchal, settler, colonial, capitalist U.S. structures of economic and political power that are extracting our planet to death are the very same forces that are responsible for the assault on Indigenous communities, on anyone living in poverty, on women across demographics, on children, on queer and especially trans children, right, and all marginalized people. Like this, it's not intersectionality, it's not just a trendy catchphrase, right? Like it's a brutal reality that we can teach through concrete examples. And I think it's important to bring that into our classrooms and have, they're hard, very difficult and complicated conversations, but we can figure out how to have them because they're so important.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. And I know we have been graciously given a little extra time, and I'm very grateful for that. And I know it's time. Dr. Burkholder, did you want to transition us?
I will. Yeah, thank you. Thank you to our professors for sharing a little bit about this contemporary work from Native American women. It's so important to hear about that contemporary work, and it's missing from so much of the educational materials that we have to use in the classroom, right? Like we have these textbooks, we have this history curriculum, but so much of it kind of ends often by the Civil War. And it can be much harder to find examples of Native American history from the 20th century or certainly from the 21st century to look at contemporary and local examples of Native American life, culture, experiences, politics, and history. So thank you for sharing that work. I will make sure that the links to the videos and the resources and the slideshow are shared with you on today's program. But now we're going to change directions a little bit, and it's my pleasure to introduce Molly DePeppo. Did I get that right this time, Molly? Molly is with us here from the New York Historical Society, where she's the manager of professional learning. She has a long career working with a number of nonprofit and museums in the New York City area, where she's been developing content for teachers, and that is what she does full-time at the New York Historical Society. So it's my pleasure to hand the microphone over to Molly, and she's going to introduce us to some of the resources that she has to share about teaching Native American women's history. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zoe, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about this topic. I'm going to take a moment to share my screen with you all, so hold on one second. Oh, I think Zoe might need to have you stop sharing first. Thank you. All right. And apologies for my screen. I did not factor in the beautiful sun streaming through my window today, but such is life. So my portion of this workshop will be focused on sharing resources that you can all use to teach students about Indigenous women's activism and resistance. And all of the links to the materials that we'll look at tonight are included in the program for this workshop. So you'll have access to everything I'm going to be talking about after this evening. And I'm going to keep this pretty interactive and ask for responses in the chat box as we go along so we can all engage with one another tonight. So for those of you who are not familiar with the New York Historical Society, we are a museum and library located in New York City, right by Central Park in Manhattan. And we are actually New York's first museum. We opened in 1804. And despite our name, we do not just cover the history of the city and the state. We cover all of U.S. history through our collections, our exhibitions, and our education programs. So I hope that if any of you find yourselves in New York, you'll come visit us. But we also have many, many free resources available on our website that you can access anytime. So to introduce our discussion today, I'd just like us to consider these questions on the screen. What does it mean to be an activist? And what forms has activism taken throughout history? And I'd love for some responses in the chat to these questions. So give you all a minute to reflect and respond in the chat. What does it mean to be an activist? And what forms can we see? Okay, moving beyond empathy and moving towards action. I think that's a great comment. Okay, to be an active promoter and champion for a cause, to take action to produce change, fighting for what one believes in, taking action for the greater good. Yeah, these are all great responses. Organizing groups to produce action and enact change. And what are some of the ways that activists have accomplished this work throughout history? Okay, so abolitionists who did speeches, trying to change legislation, writing books, raiding an arsenal, all these different forms. Okay, Alice Paul and her hunger strikes during the suffrage movement, nonviolent protests, civil disobedience. I'm thinking about marches and protests. These are all great. And then focusing on the different various causes that people believe in. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to keep going just for the sake of time, but hopefully I can introduce you to some new figures who used a variety of methods to effect change in their own communities. So these are the essential questions that will guide our discussion this evening. How did Indigenous women fight against injustice and advocate for more rights in the US during the 20th century? And how can we use primary sources and biographies to spark critical thinking and bring more perspectives into the social studies classroom? And I wanted to start with some brief background information about Indigenous activism and resistance. We'll obviously be mostly looking at 20th century examples today, but it's important to start by establishing that Native peoples have always been advocating for their communities, and this activism continues to the present day. So consider this early example. This is a water jar that you see on the screen. This was created in the 1600s by a Zuni woman during the Pueblo Revolt, and that's when several Indigenous communities united and drove Spanish colonizers off their lands in what is today known as New Mexico. So obviously an early example, but Indigenous activism, as I think we heard from all of our scholars, is very relevant right now in our own moment. So one example is just this New York Times headline that I pulled from March 15th, 2024, so just about a month ago. And this is an Onondaga claim that the US violated a 1794 treaty that guaranteed 2.5 million acres of land to them. And the case finding, which was filed in 2014, is expected as soon as this year, right? So we see how relevant all of this still is. But because we are going to examine 20th century examples tonight, I want to go over the particular challenges and oppressive policies that Indigenous communities were facing leading up to this point. So the first one I want to talk about is the Dawes Act. And this basically authorized the federal government to break up tribal lands. So they divided up reservation lands into these small plots that were given to individual Native Americans rather than held collectively by members of a tribe as it had been. And the government's goal really was to try to assimilate Native Americans into mainstream US society by urging them to farm the way that white Americans farmed. They wanted to farm, or they wanted them to farm on individual plots. And that begs the question, what happened to the land that was left over after each head of household received their plot? The government sold this surplus land to non-native US citizens, which stripped over 90 million acres of tribal land in just a few decades. So this resulted in not just a huge land dispossession, but it also completely or attempted to completely disrupt Indigenous communities' way of life and try to force them to no longer live communally. Now, by 1900, the so-called Indian Wars had also been declared to be over by the US government. And so by this point, communities were profoundly disrupted. Many had been forcibly removed from their homelands. Millions of acres of reservation lands had been taken. And now policies of forced assimilation were being advanced by the government. And we see this happening in this image of 13 unidentified Chippewa students in Western style dress at the Carlisle School, which we'll talk more about in just a moment. And I want to note, once we start looking at all of the resources, I'm going to ask all of you to act as students tonight, just so I can model how you might use some of these resources in your classroom. So we're going to take a look at one example of how federal policies really impacted Indigenous communities by looking at a set of 2 letters. And this will give you a sense of some of the issues that would later inspire activists to take action. So before we look at the letters, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context. Between the 1880s and 1920s, thousands of Indigenous children left their homes on reservations to attend Indian boarding schools funded by the government. And the most famous of these schools was the Carlisle Indian School, which was founded in 1879 in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And these schools were meant to Americanize Indigenous children. They were only allowed to speak English. They were only allowed to practice Christianity. All tribal languages, rituals, and customs were forbidden. And any student who engaged in any aspect of their culture was oftentimes severely punished. So what we're going to do now is read a set of letters that relates to a student at the Carlisle Indian School named Marie Ardishaw. And as you'll see on the screen, we include modern day summaries for all of our primary source documents. So you'll see the original text on one side, the modern day summary on the other side. This is just to help with students who might have different reading levels and allow them to still access the content of that document. So you can choose to read the original text or the summary or both. That's up to you. And I'm actually going to put the 2 letters in the chat. There's a PDF version if that's easier for folks to read. And I will say the letters go over 2 slides. So let's just take a few moments to read on our own. And then we'll come back and discuss as a group. All right, I'm going to move to the next slide for the second letter. But again, if you want to access both of them together, you can open that PDF that's in the chat. All right, so let's come back together as a group. Hopefully everyone was able to read both of the letters. And as you just read, the first letter is from a mother from the Chippewa Nation named Teresa Green, and she is requesting that her daughter, Marie, be returned home from the Carlisle School. And then the second letter from the Office of Indian Affairs informs Teresa that her request was denied because she signed a 5-year contract and Marie can only return if she graduates or if there is a reason for her to leave early. So I wanted to unpack these letters a little bit more. What does the tone and length of the commissioner's response to Teresa Green suggest about his attitude toward her and her request? I guess I'll ask for people to respond in the chat to this question. Okay, there's a distinct lack of empathy. Absolutely. He makes her sound uneducated. He sounds condescending. Absolutely. It's very short. Yes. Very dismissive. So why do you think the rules were so strict? And what does it say about the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the federal government? They didn't view them as fully human. I think that's right. And the federal government treated Indigenous people as if they could not or should not make decisions about their lives and their children's lives. They're enforcing their ideas without caring about their own culture and values, indoctrination. And I think there's a real infantilization as well that's going on here, saying you're not capable of making these decisions for yourselves. Yeah, and it shows that the government was trying to destroy Indigenous cultures. Absolutely. Now, despite these horrific policies, Indigenous communities resisted assimilation and advocated for more rights in a variety of ways. And one example of resistance is the work of Zikalasa, which I know somebody mentioned earlier, which is great. But we're going to watch a 2.5-minute video that describes her life and her work. And as we watch the video, I just want everybody to keep these questions in mind. What stands out to you about her story? Why might she have agreed to teach at the Carlisle Indian School given her own traumatic experiences? And how did she later fight assimilation? So let's watch the video now.
At the turn of the 20th century, the U.S. government forced Native Americans to assimilate into Anglo-American culture. But Gertrude Simmons Bonin, aka Zikalasa, an activist, author, and educator, fought against the Americanization of Native nations. Zikalasa spent her early childhood on the Yankton Indian Reservation in South Dakota. But when she was 8, began attending a boarding school run by American missionaries. At a time when the U.S. government restricted access to work and education for Native American people, attending a boarding school hundreds of miles away from home was one of the few ways that Zikalasa could receive an education. But these government-funded schools could be traumatic environments for the students, a culture shock at a formative age. When Zikalasa arrived at her school, the teachers brutally cut her long hair and gave her an uncomfortable school uniform. She and her fellow students were only allowed to speak English. Zitka Lassa felt the teachers treated students more like animals than people. When the school allowed her to go back home, she felt alienated from her family and community. After years of forced assimilation, she no longer felt she belonged anywhere. Zitka Lassa left again and went to study music and teaching. She got a job at the Carlisle School, a boarding school like the one she had attended, but soon realized she was contributing to a system designed to destroy her own people's culture. Zitka Lassa left the boarding school and started teaching at a school on a Ute reservation, where students could remain with their families. Zitka Lassa also used her love of writing to connect more Americans to Sioux culture. Under her pen name, which means red bird, she published short stories, essays, articles, and even an opera that were based on Sioux customs and her personal experiences. She went on to become an activist in Washington, D.C., helping shape policies and laws that countered assimilation tactics and recognized Native Americans' U.S. citizenship. Zitka Lassa channeled her experiences as a boarding school student and teacher into the fight against Americanization. Through her teaching, writing, and organizing, she helped make Indigenous peoples' voices heard and their cultures valued.
All right, so I'm curious to know what stood out to you all about her story. If you'd like to share that in the chat. And I will say these videos, we have several of these 2.5-minute animated videos, which are great for any of you who teach younger students, because we have like longer life story written versions, but we've adapted many of them into these shorter videos that you can use for our younger learners. Yeah, I think that's something that always stands out to me too, Diane, is how after she went away, she felt that she didn't belong anywhere. Okay, and Anna's wondering about what she believed about herself and her people from her schooling before she started as an activist. Yeah, and I love how she recognized that she was contributing to indoctrination, and then she pivoted to teaching at a reservation where students could maintain their cultural ties and lived on reservations with their families. Yep, the cutting of her hair because it would be traumatic. Yeah, she was literally pulled from under a bed, held down as her hair was cut. And in her culture, that is, I believe, a sign of mourning. So it would have been even more traumatic for her to go through that experience. And so we see that she fights assimilation in many different ways, right? She does it through her writing, writing essays, short stories, and an opera even. So she really uses her art as activism. And she also is kind of getting involved in policy making as well. She goes to DC and fights for policies that countered assimilation. And as one of you mentioned, right, she taught at a school that was more supportive of preserving Indigenous children's cultures, unlike the boarding school that she had attended. All right, so Zitka Lassa has a really powerful story, and I think she's a great person to introduce to students, but she is only one woman of the Yankton Dakota Sioux Nation. And when learning Indigenous history, it's really important for students to learn about a variety of people and communities, since each has their own culture and language and way of life. And students should understand that they're not a monolith. Even individuals from the same community have had very different experiences. So it's important to reflect this diversity when you're choosing classroom materials for your students. And so we're going to learn about some additional women who advocated for their communities by reading their life stories. So we're going to do an activity where you're going to get to choose one life story to read. I will put the Google Doc in the chat in just a moment, but I just want to go over the activity first. So you're going to choose one life story to read. There are 4 options. And we're all just going to kind of do this independent reading on our own. And then after everyone finishes, I'm going to open 4 breakout rooms. And each breakout room is going to be labeled with one life story. And so when we open the rooms, you're just going to join the room that is labeled with the name of the person whose story you read. And then in your breakout room, you're going to discuss the following as a group. What community did this person belong to? How did that impact their life? What issues did this individual care about? What methods did this person use to affect change? And why should other teachers or students learn about this person? So I'm going to put the link to Google Doc in the chat right now. Again, when you open it, you'll see links to all of the stories. Just choose one. And it also has all of the discussion questions listed in there. So we'll take about 6 or 7 minutes to read these on our own. And then after that, we will open the breakout rooms. All right, we're going to take 2 more minutes to finish reading the life story. If you've already finished reading one and you want to take a look at another one, feel free to do that. All right, so hopefully everyone's wrapped up reading at least one life story. At this point, we're going to open the breakout room. So you're going to choose the room labeled with the name of the life story that you read. And I'm going to put the link to the Google Doc in the chat again, just so you all have all the links to all of the life stories and also the discussion questions that you should be talking through with your group. So we encourage everybody to turn on their camera if they're comfortable and turn on their microphone just to chat for about 7-ish minutes. And yep, we're ready, Albert, when you are. And if anyone needs help moving to their breakout room, just let us know. We can help assign you to the proper one.
I have the power to move people into a breakout room. So if you can't figure out the tech, you can drop a note in the chat, or you can turn your mic on, just ask me to move you. So you should be going into a breakout room for one of the 4 life stories that we read about. If you need some help, just let me know.
Dr. Burkholder, I'm seeing some names I didn't see earlier. Did we have late joiners?
Not that late.
Okay.
But if anyone is still in the main room and needs help figuring out what's going on and what we're doing, just let us know. There's a link to a Google Doc in the chat that you should be able to see, but if you did just come into the room, you might not be able to see it. Or if you're just breakout room shy, that's understandable too. But this is supposed to be a chance for kind of folks to have a discussion with other people. So we'd love it if you pop into a breakout room. There's the Google Doc with the connection to the life stories. Asadi, you have to put yourself in the breakout room, or I can put you in one. If you want, you can turn on your mic or type in the chat and tell me which one you want to go into. Okay, thanks, Albert.
All right, looks like people are coming back to the main room now. Hopefully you got to have some good discussions with your colleagues. And if anybody had issues with the breakout rooms, don't worry, we are going to go over each life story briefly, just so you can all hear about all the amazing women that you didn't get to read about. So before I dive into the stories themselves, is there anything that came out of your discussions that you want to share with the whole group about any of the women that you read about? You can share that in the chat. If there's anything interesting you learned or surprising that you learned about any of the women. And I see some people are still joining us back in the main room. So I just asked everybody if they had anything interesting that came out of their discussions about any of the women they read about, anything they found surprising or interesting that stood out to them about these women, just to share that in the chat. And I'll let people type in if they have anything they want to share, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to go over quickly each life story just so you can all learn about the various women. So starting with Mary Kavena Pakui, she was really instrumental in preserving Native Hawaiian language, traditions, dance, music, stories, and worked with scholars and anthropologists to ensure that traditional Hawaiian culture would be kept alive for future generations. People still use her work today. Grace Thorpe was a young woman when World War II broke out, and she eventually served on the Pacific Front during the war. And after the war, after going through a very difficult marriage and divorce, she felt very alienated from her heritage and eventually moved back to her family's homeland in Oklahoma and became really instrumental in dissuading Sac and Fox leadership from allowing the government to use tribal lands for nuclear testing. So she kind of changed their minds and became very active in the anti-nuclear movement in general. Patricia Locke was trained and worked as a teacher after college, which informed her later work of trying to establish tribal colleges. She really believed that tribes needed to control their own schools in order to provide Indigenous students with the education that best met their needs. And she also worked on preserving Indigenous languages and traditions later in life. And then finally, for Wilma Mankiller, she dedicated her life to improving living conditions and opportunities for the Cherokee people. She did things like increase college enrollment, worked on infrastructure projects, and various other efforts. And she became the first female chief of the Cherokee Nation. And despite some initial backlash, she received some death threats and hate mail. She was actually reelected several times because of how successful her initiatives were. So before we wrap up, I just want to share some of the takeaways from this session that hopefully you can impart on your students. So the first one is Indigenous people have continuously fought for their rights in the United States. Indigenous people used all forms of activism to make their voices heard in the 20th century. Simply embracing your culture in a world where the dominant culture wants to erase you can be activism. And this fight continues today. So the last thing I want to share is just some potential student extension activities to further your students' understanding of this topic. So one of the things we like to do with a lot of students is this activity we call Create Like a Curator. So you would put students in 4 groups and have each student read one of the life stories that we just read. And then they have to complete this task as a group where they basically imagine they're creating a panel in an exhibition, and they have to tell the story of Indigenous women's achievements and experiences during the 20th century. And then you provide them with some prompts to help them think through it as a group. What do you want people to know? What political, social, economic crises did these women live through? How did they shape their lives? What issues did they care about? And how will you connect the lives and experiences of the different women you're including? And also maybe explore the differences between the women as well. Another idea is pairing life stories with documents. So for example, you could have your students read the life story of Zikala Sa and then have them read this article she wrote in 1919 to help students learn more about why she fought for US citizenship for Indigenous peoples. And again, just engaging with her writing to continue that learning. And the final idea is, after exploring any of the historical resources we analyzed today, you can have students research a current day example of how Indigenous people are still fighting injustice today. And again, this is to combat the myth that Indigenous communities don't still exist today or aren't still advocating for their communities. And so hopefully that will dispel that notion from your students. And everything we discussed can be found on our free curriculum website called Women and the American Story. This is just a tiny fraction of what's available on the website, but we call it WAMS for short, and you can find it at wams.nyhistory.org. It is divided into 10 chronological units, so it covers all of US history. So again, we just looked at a few resources on Indigenous women, but there are so many more from earlier time periods that we didn't have a chance to explore. And so I hope you will continue looking at all these different resources that are available. And we also have a vast curriculum library that covers pretty much every topic in US history at this point. We have over 20 different curriculum guides, including all different primary sources and life stories from various time periods. So I would encourage you to check our library out as well. And again, all of the links that we looked at tonight are found in the program that Zoe shared earlier. So at that point, I am going to put the evaluation for this program in the chat right now. If people can just take a few moments to share their feedback, and I will pass it back to Zoe to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Molly. That was a terrific program, and I love those resources that you have access to and that you all have developed over there at the New York Historical Society. It's such a strong way to augment what is in the traditional kind of textbooks and the materials that teachers have access to. We've hit the 5:30 mark, which means that people are going to flee a sinking ship. So I will just say thank you so much to everyone for coming here today and for joining us. In the chat, you will see a link to a professional development certificate. If you're a teacher, that's our PD certificate from Montclair State University. It's in a Google Doc. If you select File, Make a Copy, you can have your own copy to fill out. Thank you again to Molly. Thank you again to the professors from Montclair State University. Thank you to all of you. Our contact information is in the program. If you have any questions or want to follow up about anything, please reach out to us. And that's it for today. Thanks again, everyone. Goodbye.